Well, we're about halfway through the 2015 NFL season. As we start to get to this point in time in every season, we start to talk about postseason award winners, Coach of the Year, Most Valuable Player. And I think it's in part to help us fill the time until the next week's slate of games. It's something to help us stay engaged in the NFL from a fans and, frankly, media standpoint. It's an interesting topic, interesting conversation. Always brings up a nice, lively, spirited, heated debate, if you will. So I thought it was an appropriate time to come on here and share my thoughts since we're getting ready to go into week 9 of the 2015 NFL season this upcoming weekend. Give you my thoughts on how the MVP race in the NFL currently shakes out based off of the way I see it. Now, usually when it comes to the MVP award, I see maybe 3 philosophies in terms of who people support, who people vote for, and why. Number 1 is the best player on the best team. You see this a lot, especially in the NBA. You most certainly do. The thought process being that he was so valuable to them and he was the best player on that team and they ended up with the best record, so clearly he had a significant impact, and that's why he deserves to win the Most Valuable Player award. You know, Steph Curry would be a perfect example of that this past season for the Golden State Warriors. Whether he was truly the most valuable player or not for the league, you know, I guess it depends on perspective, but he was the best player on the best team. Number 2 is you will look at guys that are just so statistically out there compared to anybody else that when you're comparing value, you look at how good they've been. And even if their team isn't the very, very best, but their team is still pretty good, they made the playoffs, that still is enough to put them over the hump and help them win the MVP award. A guy like LeBron James, who has won several NBA Most Valuable Player awards, Barry Bonds winning several MVP awards in baseball. These are guys that sometimes were just so statistically dominant that you had no choice because nobody measured up to them and their play was so superior to anybody else's. Then you have that third option, and sometimes this is the hardest to quantify and make something that is tangible out of it, and that is measuring impact to a team. What happens with that player that makes them so much better than when he isn't there? And usually the best way you can gauge this is if a player had to miss a period of time during that season itself or miss time the previous season, or you see such a growth and an improvement in his game that the team makes a huge leap from one year to the next. Like I said, that one sometimes is the hardest to quantify because at the end of the day, when we look at the MVP awards, I think we focus a lot on philosophy number 1 and philosophy number 2. It's either the best player on the best team when it comes to the NFL Most Valuable Player, or they're so statistically dominant that, you know, and that's part of the reason why J.J. Watt got so much consideration, I think, for the Most Valuable Player award last year. He was so far and away the best defensive player in the league, and he was so statistically and football dominant for what he did on his side of the ball, even though he was a defensive end in the 3-4, that he got a lot of MVP consideration. So there's a lot of options out there right now in terms of players that I think you could turn to and give some MVP consideration to, some stronger than others. But I think there are 7 candidates above all else that I look at and I think you can make the best case for. Again, even within that top 7, there's some that you can make stronger cases for than others. Now, before I get to the top 7, one honorable mention I do want to throw in there is a wide receiver, and that's DeAndre Hopkins from the Houston Texans. And the only reason I throw this name out there is if the Houston Texans somehow find a way to win that division with a defense that isn't playing at the same level they did the year before, with an offense that's lost Arian Foster, that has Brian Hoyer as a freaking quarterback now, and not a whole lot of other talent around him. You know from a fantasy standpoint what DeAndre Hopkins has done this year, but at some point in time you have to look at what he's done in the face of what he's facing and say if this team makes the playoffs, even at a 7-9, 8-8 record by winning that AFC South boo-boo-ass division, he would be a guy that would at least deserve some consideration. So I wanted to make sure I took a moment and recognized him. But now on to the real deal contenders at this point in time. I'm going to work backwards from 7 onto the guy that I think as of this moment in the NFL is the league's most valuable player. And we'll start off with number 7. And I think you can fit into the third category of measurable impact compared to when he isn't there versus when he is there, on top of being very statistically good, and say that this guy belongs in the conversation. That's Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings. Look, I don't think, unless he runs for 2,000 yards this year, which probably isn't going to happen, unless he puts up like 20 touchdowns, which most certainly probably isn't going to happen, he's not going to get a whole lot of MVP love because of the off-the-field crap with the child abuse, and I get that and I understand that. However, from a pure football standpoint, you look at Adrian Peterson and you can quantify his impact on this Vikings team. This is a team where Bridgewater is still trying to figure it out. He has those flashes, he has those moments, but he hasn't been consistently great. This is a team with their best wide receiver, frankly, being a fifth-round pick out of this year's draft in Stephon Diggs. You look at Adrian Peterson, and you can look at the Vikings and see a 5-2 team. You can see his impact that he has on all areas of that team, both offensively and, frankly, defensively as well, in terms of the Vikings being able to control the clock, establish a physical identity on the offensive side of the ball, taking some pressure off of Bridgewater. I think Adrian Peterson definitely deserves to be in the mix in the MVP consideration. He's third in the league in rushing yards. Again, you could point to when he wasn't there last year versus him being there this year. You see the Vikings at 5-2, and you look at this team as a team that's probably going to get a wild card berth in the NFC playoffs. Number 6, and this is number 6 from now. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't have even been in the conversation. But when you look at the past few weeks and you look at the New Orleans Saints and you look at Drew Brees, you have to give him some love. You have to give him some consideration. I don't think the MVP award should always just be the quarterback award. However, there are certain instances where you could say this guy deserves to be in the conversation. You know, coming off of the heels of a 7-touchdown game, you look at it. The running game is okay, but nothing great and nothing that they establish on a consistent enough basis to take enough pressure off of Drew Brees. He doesn't have the same weapons in the passing game that he once did. Jimmy Graham is gone. Marquise Colston is not the same player that he once was, so he's throwing to a former first-round pick in Brandon Cooks and an undrafted player like Willie Snead and a 30-plus-year-old tight end in Ben Watson. To give you an idea of how long Ben Watson's in the league, he was in the same draft class for the New England Patriots in 2004 as Vince Wilfork, when the New England Patriots won their 3rd Super Bowl out of 4 seasons. Just think about that for a second. What Drew Brees has been able to do, you look at the Saints now. Yes, they're only 4-4, but they're not that far away from playoff consideration. If Drew Brees continues to play at the level that he has played in recent weeks, and this Saints team stays in the mix and stays in wildcard contention, I think not only is Drew Brees an MVP candidate, he probably ranks much higher on the list than he does right now, at least in my eyes. Number 5, I'm going to recognize the Red Rocket, the Red Rifle, the Red Rider, whatever you want to call the ginger himself, Andy Dalton. You know, we've talked about before, I know I most certainly have. There's been years where I've been very, very high on the Cincinnati Bengals. Ironically enough, for the benefit of Bengals fans, I backed off of them just a little bit this year. So, of course, they've started off 7-0. But when you look at Andy Dalton, he looks like a different player. He's been much more consistent. He's avoided some of the big mistakes. When his teams needed him to step up and play well in key spots and key moments, he has delivered consistently throughout the start of this 2015 season. He does have good weapons around him like A.J. Green and Marvin Jones outside, Tyler Eifert at tight end, a nice 1-2 combination of running back and Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard, a really good offensive line. But at the end of the day, you could see the tangible difference in the Bengals this year compared to previous years where they've made the playoffs 4 straight years because of the quality of the improvement of the play of Andy Dalton. You see how the Red Rifle has progressed significantly in his game, and the team, as a result, has followed suit. And they're sitting at 7-0. And when you're a quarterback of a team that is 7-0, and you're not just handing off the ball 60 times a game, you have to be doing something right. You have to deserve some type of MVP consideration. I think Andy Dalton does. Number 4, I'll go with Tom Brady, the New England Patriots. Now, look, you're going to see plenty of people that'll be like he's the best in the business, or at least some might say at this point in time he's the best that has ever played at the position. And I might, at least at this moment, until Aaron Rodgers gets more time under his wings, might be inclined to agree with that assessment. You look at Tom Brady, though, and you look at this New England Patriots team. That defense is not all that great. He has, outside of Rob Gronkowski and maybe to a lesser degree Julian Edelman, a lot of no-name talent around him on that offense. That offensive line is okay, but nothing special. But you look at the New England Patriots, they're steamrolling people with their ability to score points and consistently keep pressure up. Tom Brady has been statistically brilliant. He's on pace for 5,000-plus passing yards. He has 20 touchdown passes and only 1 interception. You could quantify his leadership. You can see it. You understand it. You grasp it. So you can see his impact on the team. However, the reason I don't have him a little higher has nothing to do with Deflategate or anything else at all like that whatsoever. It's the fact when I looked at who they've played so far this year, they beat Pittsburgh, who didn't have Le'Veon Bell. They beat the overrated-ass Buffalo Bills. They beat a bad Jacksonville Jaguars team. They beat a Dallas Cowboys team without Tony Romo and Dez Bryant. They beat a bad, frankly, Indianapolis Colts team, who in some ways you could argue gave the game to the New England Patriots based off of some stupid decisions on the special teams side of the ball. They beat a game, but only so-so or somewhat good Jets team, and then they handled an underwhelming, underachieving Dolphins team. Not a lot of quality victories there. So when I look at them, I sit there and say, yeah, they're 7-0, and Brady's been statistically brilliant. No question about it. And he deserves consideration because when you look at what's around him, he deserves consideration whether you like it or not. I just don't think he's the most worthy guy. So that's why I have him at this moment at number 4. Now, if they go 16-0, different story entirely. Number 3, this might shock some of you, but I think maybe this is in part me looking at what he's done for a team so far and maybe projecting going forward what he's going to do the rest of the year. But at this moment, my number 3 MVP candidate is Todd Gurley of the St. Louis Rams. You're talking about a guy who's only played 5 games. Granted, 5 games. He missed the first 2 games. And then week 3, he only played a little bit, splitting carries with Trey Mason. But the last 4 games he started, he's run for 146 yards against the Arizona Cardinals in a win, 159 yards against the Green Bay Packers on the road in a loss, 128 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns in a win, and 133 yards and a touchdown against the San Francisco 49ers in another win. You see Todd Gurley. Behind him, they're 3-1 with him as their starting running back the last 4 games. He's had 4 games where he's put up at least 125 yards rushing, all the while knowing that Nick Foles is no real threat to beat you with his arm. The Rams do not have a lot to work with on the outside in terms of the passing game. So teams know what the philosophy is. Teams know what the Rams are going to do, and yet they haven't been able to stop it with Todd Gurley yet. So when you look at the whole aura of the St. Louis Rams after 3 weeks. Yeah, they had beaten the Seahawks in week number 1, but then they lost 2 straight games. You talk about a team that's 1-2, and people are like, oh, this is just another overrated, under-delivering Rams team. But here comes Todd Gurley, and it's like he saved the day. The entire aura and atmosphere and feeling around this Rams organization is different, and he has them in a position, in part, with their 4-3 record, to potentially contend in that division or at the very worst stay in the wild card mix all year long. And if the St. Louis Rams make it to the playoffs, it's going to be in large part because of the play of Todd Gurley. And if that's the case, then you have to strongly consider him as an MVP candidate. Number 2, I'm going to go to Cam Newton of the Carolina Panthers. When I look at Cam right now, the numbers aren't overwhelming in terms of as a thrower. But this is one of these situations, I think, where you have to take a look at the entirety of what's going on. I was very big on this Carolina Panthers team heading into the season, if you remember. And I thought this was a team that had a chance to get home field advantage throughout the NFC playoffs, and a lot of you thought I was nuts, especially once Kelvin Benjamin went down with a knee injury. But that kind of makes the whole point for me. Their second-round pick, Devin Funchess, has basically done absolutely nothing. They've got some solid performances out of Jonathan Stewart other weeks, and not so much. Ted Ginn is hit or miss, as you saw in the Monday night game. He gets wide open by 5 yards, and then he drops the ball because it hits him in the worst spot possible, right in his fucking hands. He's really only got one weapon to work with on a consistent basis in the passing game in Greg Olsen. He has an okay runner, but nothing great in Jonathan Stewart. You could argue that Cam Newton is the best ball carrier that this team has, and he only has one real consistent threat or weapon to throw to on the offensive side of the ball. But here sit the Carolina Panthers, behind the strength, yes, of a very, very good defense, 7-0. The leaders in the NFC clubhouse right now about halfway through the season. They've beaten some quality teams. They went into Seattle and beat the Seahawks. They find a way to win games. They find a way to get the job done. And a lot of that has to do, in my opinion, with the leadership of Cam Newton and his ability to make big plays when needed in big-time situations. It's not just always the stats alone. Stats can be sexy because it's easier for us to qualify and quantify what that player's impact is because we can speak to it. But sometimes it goes beyond that in terms of what we can see. And what I see is a guy that has taken a huge step forward in terms of being a leader and being a winner and being a real, true franchise quarterback, even if the numbers in the passing game haven't been outstanding. When you look at what's around Cam Newton, you look at what he has to work with and what he's been able to accomplish and what this team's been able to accomplish, Cam Newton's right in the mix, and I wouldn't give a whole lot of grief to people sitting there and voting him the most valuable player right now. I just wouldn't. But I do think there's one candidate that's a little bit better because, in part, at the end of the day, he kind of fits into all 3 of the categories. You could say he's the best player on at least one of the best teams in the NFL, in the Arizona Cardinals. You could sit there and say he's been statistically brilliant, which he's on pace to throw for 4,700 yards, and he has 20 touchdown passes, only 6 interceptions. So there's a lot of pressure on him because he throws the ball a lot, and he's been very effective when he does make some big plays and consistently does so and doesn't put his team in a lot of bad positions more often than not. And then you can also look at the impact to the team. And this we can quantify because when he went out with his ACL injury last year, you saw what happened to the Arizona Cardinals when they were trying to start Drew Stanton and then Ryan Lindley and even Logan Thomas, for crying out loud. You saw what happened to the Cardinals. Now you look at the Cardinals here, and they've got Carson Palmer, and he's playing well, playing very well, and this team is 6-2. When you look at it, some of you might say, well, that's a reflection of the coaching and Bruce Arians, and I'm not going to dispute that very much. Clearly a Coach of the Year candidate as well, at least one of them. But when you look at the combination of all factors, you can quantify the difference that Carson Palmer makes to his team easier than some of these other candidates because you saw what happened to the Cardinals last year when he wasn't there, and you see what they are this year with him in there, with him playing every single week. He's playing at a very, very high level, and he's the best player on one of the best teams in the league. For my money at this moment, and I mean no offense to the Cam Newton supporters because I get it, I understand it, and I don't fully disagree with your viewpoint. To the Tom Brady supporters that say, look at what he does in the face of the pressure, being defending Super Bowl champions, he's playing as well as he ever has at the age that he's doing. Again, I get you. I don't think right now there's a clear-cut runaway winner, and a lot of it at this point in time at least, because we are only halfway through the season, is about your perspective. My perspective at this particular moment is when I look at everything from a balanced perspective, I look at impact on team, statistical performance, and the fact that we're talking about the guy that plays the most important position in the league. While it shouldn't be the quarterback award, the MVP award usually ends up being that because that position is so important. At this moment, for my money, Carson Palmer of the Arizona Cardinals is the NFL's most valuable player. As always, you're welcome to chime in with your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree. If you disagree, let me know why, and let me know who you back. And yes, Anthony Rizzuti, I know you're going to shower me with Cam Newton love. Let us have it.